Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. I'm on the main menu because I wanted to point out that they have updated the color background a little bit here for more of a colorful, less of a pale white feel to it. And noticeably, at least on this main screen, that tracking bit of pixels seems to finally be gone. Like, there was always these little pixels right at the top that was some kind of like, we're going to track you if you stream or something. And maybe they've got them off the screen now, or maybe they've just hidden them so much better. But it was incredibly distracting because you'd even be in like solo mode and you would see that no matter what screen you're on, there's always these pixels that seem to slightly deform. Um, and I don't even know what technology it was, or if there it was even a technology there. It literally could have just been a visual bug. Uh, but yeah, I don't really know the reason for that. And here we can see we're downloading things, uh, which is no way to start stream, certainly. Today is Monday, May 8th. Over the weekend has been an absolute nightmare for me. The newest TV I bought broke just shy of 1 year into owning it. Uh, and honestly, I was never super happy with that TV, but I'm not also happy with the idea of potentially having to buy a new TV, which we'll see how the warranty and repair and shipping a giant, I think it's like an 80-inch TV. It was really big. The aspects of like 4K, never really engaged with it because frankly it was too dark for the room it is in, which is kind of a uniquely stupid room with too many windows and too much light in it. Uh, Trying to find any 4K content in general is kind of difficult. Yes, there are a few movies here and there on streaming services, but like I don't have a 4K UHD player, and that's really where you would get your quality uh, product. Uh, and then my Wi-Fi has just really gone to crap, and it's just getting worse and worse. And I hope it's just my Wi-Fi is somehow also burnt out, even though that Wi-Fi router replaced another Wi-Fi router, so it's only at most 2 or 3 years old. Uh, but it is just like constantly dropping, and so now I'm waiting till Wednesday to get a new Wi-Fi router, which led me to do basically, if I did any episodes of Marvel Lego DC Supervillains, it was probably 2 on like Saturday early, and then most of Saturday and Sunday I was trying to watch Netflix to see if I could fix the Wi-Fi router, which was frankly probably a waste of time. For the new update onward, the game will automatically update upon launch for Steam users. Thanks for your patience for waiting for automatic updates. We'll see if that is true, or if we ever do end up seeing another um, if they ever do fix that. And then room matches between accounts with different versions are not possible, which that's fine. And then a new visual is added when Blue Eyes White Dragon reduces your life to 0. And it displays an icon on whether card used in effect this turn. That should be somewhat helpful. Display a check mark in the text of effects used during the turn on some cards. Change the background color of the card description screen to match the original owner of the card, and then double click to confirm when selecting a card. So we're really not blowing you out of the water with changes here. And there's a new selection pack apparently. Let's see about that. As far as issues, multiple cursors may be displayed during duels, and maintenance notice. So yeah, it's been a bad weekend, and we can just hope that things will get turned around. Like, inherently, while messing with my Wi-Fi, I noticed that my DHCP servers settings for my router, the dynamic client host protocol, or whatever DHCP stands for, dynamic host client protocol, something like that. That's the thing that gives IP addresses to devices. So a device like a phone connects to a Wi-Fi access point. It asks, what IP address do you want me to have? It's almost certainly going to give you an internal IP address, something like 192.168.0.200 or something like that, just that last digit number. It also gives several other bits of information, and one of the bits of information it gives is the name of the router, or the IP address of the router, not the name, although you could get the name too if you asked for it. Mostly it's devices asking for it. So far, as far as these packs, these are the ones we've already worked with. This still might be slightly good candidate to open more packs with, but I don't have enough gems for that. But I found that option 3 and option 6 both seem to cause problems if you give them multiple responses that are the same, or multiple responses in general, particularly with the ecobee version 3 thermostat that I have. And so this is particularly a case where the newest software on the ecobee thermostat has caused a bug, in which if it gets invalid DHCP information, or DHCP information it considers invalid, even though what I'm telling it is fairly valid, it will just try again. And so it creates effectively a denial of service attack inside your own house, because it's just constantly trying over and over again. In fact, a lot of devices, because my ratio router too, the ratio sprinkler irrigation controller, has some problems with my settings, and inherently it would be very, very easy for anybody to accuse me of just having bad settings and blame me. Why am I opening 100 of these? What did I just click on? Look, it's saying 10 of 100. Alright, well, we're gonna have to click skip here at this rate, because that was supposed to be it, and let's just skip. I don't know whether something glitched there or what. Either that, or they've added a new button and I just stupidly clicked on a new button. Well, I guess I stupidly clicked on a new button, where I just opened 100 of those legacy packs. Well, let's see what that does. That eliminates me ever opening any more packs for a while. And inherently, I've just proven with my own not paying attention the danger of The real danger of potentially having a new interface is that it's just going to be very easy for somebody to click something different. What's funny here is you have only one extra normal. This doesn't make sense. Let's see, we gotta include here forbidden cards so we get a good indication. So by opening 100 legacy packs, that may have gotten me down just a little bit, but it didn't really get me down as far as I would have thought. So either we ran into a glitch there, and I got really screwed. Or I got a bunch of cards, but there's something specifically about each of these legacy pack cards that makes them disenchantable, which seems like that might be the case because we have like 7 copies of these cards, and I just don't see a reason why I wouldn't be able to disenchant these cards. And so you inherently are always going to get legacy packs, and it does seem to me like I am very close to having almost a complete collection of these legacy cards. At least one copy. And definitely I'm just going to be on the path towards having 3 copies of each of these legacy cards, which is 4,000 cards of the 10,000 cards in the game. So roughly half of the cards in this game are being handed to everybody, which at a certain point it would have just made a lot of sense to hand a complete collection, 3 copies of all series 1 2,000 cards. Maybe you don't go as far as like 4,000 cards. That being said, these like legacy pack cards, you could easily get 3 copies of this. That could be your early journey. Certainly, instead of getting a legacy pack, just have it hand you 3 copies of, say, this card after one victory, and then the next victory hand you 3 copies of this card. Perhaps you spread it out, so like next time you'll get a spell card, next time you'll get a monster card. So it varies a little bit, but for every one victory, getting 3 copies of this, you would need then inherently like 4,000 victories to get all the cards, which maybe you balance that out a little bit more down to like 400 journeys, your first 400 victories, your first 500 victories, to be on a consistent path with all players getting 3 copies of these relatively useless cards. That's effectively what they do in the story mode. They just don't give you a lot of cards for doing quite a bit of story mode. So yeah, I did very little YouTubing stuff once again over the weekend, and this is just consistently a problem. I've just gotten so bad at making content. And I was watching Netflix with the unacceptable every 20 minutes or so, at the longest, often a lot more often than that, the internet connection just tanking effectively. My 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi, I think at one point I got the 5 gigahertz working, but the 2.4 gigahertz just tanks, like, and it's just not acceptable that you would watch a 30-minute show streaming, and in the middle of that 30-minute show, often at about the 22-minute mark when things are most important, you just run into a 30-second long to a minute long buffering where it has to reconnect and retry to update the DHCP for no real reason. And arguably, I'm not sure if this really is my Wi-Fi router's fault as much as this might be my internet service provider's fault, because it is also fairly random. Sometimes it gets really bad, sometimes it will work perfectly for an hour or two. And there's just no happy scenario. If it works for 3 hours, then everything somehow is magically fixed on my current Wi-Fi router, and then it doesn't justify buying a new one that's arriving on Wednesday. Like, ideally the best scenario, and it's not even a happy scenario even there, because this has just been so frustrating and so much work has been put into it. But the best scenario would be everything would work perfectly, and then I would just have a backup router that is configured perfectly for no real reason. So, yeah. There's just no happy scenario there, which I don't know if that is a consistent problem with a lot of projects I do, is that eventually you run into these scenarios where it's just a lose-lose. You've either spent too much time on it, or even if it was fixed, it wasn't. It was still, I personally wouldn't know what was fixed, which is part of the problem too. Which made me very happy when I went and checked on the TV that was broken over the weekend, yesterday, and found the TV wouldn't even turn on now. So it had a different problem where the HDMI ports were not receiving video signal, and I don't know how this really happened, but now it won't even turn on, so it does definitely feel like the motherboard on the TV's just totally burnt out, which it would be somewhat dangerous if they sent me a motherboard to replace, which I doubt they would really do that. They'd probably send a repairman with a motherboard if they were going to do that, but more than likely they'll just want to send the whole TV back. Of course, the problem with this TV is I bought it at Walmart, and then Walmart, you could have returned something after like 90 days. You can't return things after 90 days, so like it's very possible that I'll end up returning the TV to Walmart on behalf of TCL, but it's also very possible that there's going to be some weird shipping nonsense going on, and if I have to pay for shipping, it's not going to be worth it. It's just going to be such a big TV. It's not particularly heavy. It's a modern enough TV where you don't have that problem, but it's big. And it's not like I kept the box for it. Interestingly, we still don't have solo mode. No playing in solo mode as a daily quest. Maybe they severely reduced that. But yeah, just the finality of being able to say, hey, this is broken, this TV won't even turn on now, is great. Now, there is also a point where buying a new TV inherently doesn't have to be the solution. I have another TV on a wall that's doing nothing. Putting that to use is fine. And at this point, Roku has so much like spyware built into it as far as it calling home and doing telemetry, and you can try and block that, but even trying to block it just causes it to try and connect over and over again, like way more than than most other devices. That at this point I'd like to get away from Roku TVs, move to Android TVs, and start to work for that. There's a much better reason than just paranoia around spyware. So there's the new icons. Even though that's a legitimate concern, certainly. But just going to an Android TV where you could potentially install Android apps, and there could potentially be a routing path and just a more open world open garden experience, even though Android Play Store for the TVs is probably limited. I wouldn't be surprised if it's very much like Android Auto, where there is a very small subset of apps that you can put on it. But particularly in my case, even though I am at this point fairly certain it was a mistake to get so many Wi-Fi smart bulbs, and that is causing some of the network problems I'm having, I'm hoping to power through that with the new router and a Android Smart TV. It would potentially let me install the Tuya Smart Life app and see if that could be of any real use being on the TV. In particular, if I could change my video doorbell to be in that same home system. Of course, at the moment, I would heavily recommend everybody hold off, wait till you have Wi-Fi thread devices that connect to Matter, and then there would be some built-in Matter app and software, even for Android TV. But the idea of somebody ringing a doorbell and then the camera turning on and showing up on the TV is a very interesting concept, certainly, if you can pull it off and if it really works. And then there's just a lot more room for activities, to quote Step Brothers as a movie I haven't even watched, with Android. Whereas the Roku store, I mean, it had a couple of like apps that I'm sure very few people used that would connect to a more open standard style DVR cameras, but that would still be their own separate apps. And more standard wise, I just have had a lot of crashing of Netflix and Amazon Prime, some of the biggest apps on Roku TVs. Perhaps they're crashing because they're trying to call home and being blocked, or who knows, or perhaps they're just crashing because of bad network connection settings. With this new router, I'm going to try very hard to not adjust any settings at all, and hopefully there just aren't that many settings in the first place. Like as far as advanced settings, I'm hoping that those are just hidden away where I can never see or touch them. I'm not really looking for anything away from standard. To a certain extent, I guess I am looking for some slight modifications. Like I want a virtual access point, but with OpenWRT, I'm not sure I need a second guest Wi-Fi network as much as I could simply have AdGuard Home, like filter all adult content on almost all devices except for a couple that would be whitelisted. Because honestly, I imagine smart TVs and such would never even be recognizable if they were filtered, if adult content was filtered and like Google Safe Search was enabled on them. The only thing possibly there is if a smart TV went to Google and then you realized it was filtered there, but it's not a bad idea. Just as a default, even if you don't have any kids ever coming in your house, like there's just been so many stories of someone accidentally sharing porn on a TV when someone else is in the room or in a different room, that potentially having AdGuard Home installed to prevent that and having every adult content filtered to prevent that is just a nice little safety. Let's see. And so with AdGuard Home installed in OpenWRT, I'm also going to try to stay further away from things like DNS Mask and DNS Crypt, which AdGuard Home itself can handle, I think, all of that itself a little bit better. It does inherently send, I think, traffic to AdGuard Home, but whatever. I'll still be trying to use DNS security and DNS Crypt, but I'll let AdGuard Home handle it. And then that's kind of all I really care about. Like everything else, well, the main goals on this new OpenWRT setup is to go to OpenWRT first and foremost, because that will hopefully have more people working on it than DDWRT at this point, because there's really only one person going by the name of Brainslayer working on DDWRT, and then a lot of fans and experimentals on the forums, and that's about it. There was another guy named Kong that was working on it, but he moved over to OpenWRT, and I'm assuming that there's probably multiple contributors to the code there. And DDWRT in particular is focusing specifically on the Broadcom chipset proprietary Wi-Fi drivers and chipset drivers in general. So that's probably the main split as to why there's even still two different things, is that Brainslayer literally works for Broadcom, I believe, or somebody, Linksys. Either works for Linksys or Broadcom, and is doing the same programming for the proprietary versions of the software that come with the Wi-Fi routers. And then he's probably got some kind of like 30% of your own project time in his job description and contract, like a lot of IT people do, where they just let people work on whatever projects they want to work on, and that's probably where he does DDWRT. And I definitely think at one point DDWRT was the way to go. It's just been, that was probably years ago. But it is also annoying to buy a new router that is just the number one spot compared to the number two spot in a list that I found as far as the best routers that you could purchase. Although this new router does have like 8 connections, so there's some crazy stuff I can do later on as far as just having 8 Ethernet connections instead of 4. But by default, I just want to get ad blocking, because it's definitely a no-go if ad blocking doesn't work. AdGuard Home will obviously handle that. I want to get the network attached storage set up on it, and I want to get the Wi-Fi working and the internet working by default. And then WireGuard VPN tunneling also, and moving those kinds of things over will probably take a while. So I'm probably looking at starting on Wednesday a case where I spend a lot of time just trying to move the software over. I also got this new router used, so there could be some danger in that, but also, why pay full price for something that you're immediately going to hack and change firmware on? But yeah, the VPN tunnel, OpenWRT claims they have better quality of service. I'll leave it on its default settings, whatever that's enabled or disabled to start with. I'm going to try and leave a lot of things on their default settings. And make better backups and start from a better place of having procedures to make better backups. I'm hoping that it has a internal flash memory called the JFFS in DDWRT, journaling flash filing system, I think is what that stands for. But if it doesn't, then just everything would have to be saved to the hard drive plugged into it. Later on, I can get very fancy though, potentially, and connect all 8 of the Ethernet connections to a switch I already have. And this only works if you have a special switch that supports, I think it's called 802.1.1x or something like that. I don't think it's an 802.11 setup. This is a lot of nerdy stuff that I'm sure most people don't care about, but there's a port binding setting you can do where I have a 32 port switch that would let me take, just like a server rack, all 8 of the connections on the back of the router and put it on the switch, and then it could bind all of those into one giant trunk line. Well, we've got 3 new of these rewards, thank goodness for that. I probably don't realize that I need to move faster through the ranked here, but we'll just have to keep playing. And so yeah, all the internet could then immediately be in this big thick highway of 8 connections to the switch, and then the switch could try and handle all of that traffic a bit thicker. Although in reality, let's just assume you have like a 2.5 gigahertz internet, and the WAN port on this Wi-Fi router actually does do 2.5 gigahertz, but each of the network connections for the LAN port, the local area network, are only 1 gigahertz. So 3, maybe 4 for some overhead of those connections being combined would saturate the entirety of the internet. So it really doesn't make the most amount of sense to have all 8 ports connected to the switch. It probably makes a lot more sense to only connect 4 of the ports to the switch and then have 4 other ports connected to other switches, and dual things that way. Of course, you don't want to create a loop there and have 2 switches that then connect back into each other, because that would certainly make a weirder situation and make a problem. Immediately it would make a problem. you'd need to install spanning tree protocol or configure some very complicated software if you were going to try and connect 2 switches. And in a funny way, I guess we really have probably crossed the line where it makes a lot more sense for a small home or medium home, relatively speaking, to have 8 network wired connections there. Because I could definitely see like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6, 7. Yeah. While I may not have 8 distinct rooms that each need their own wired connection to it, it kind of would make some sense to have 2 wired connections to each room, particularly if you're trying to throw access points in the 4 corners of a house. And I could definitely see a situation where you have a slightly bigger house or a second floor house, and at that point 8 connections makes a lot of sense. Or you can just have some special priorities, certainly, and have a lot of devices, have 4 devices right next to the router and directly plugged into it, and then 4 wires going to 4 other rooms. And inevitably, you are in this situation where, as you grew, as your network grew, you probably are going to buy fairly cheap switches. So, so it is very possible that you have like a good switch on the back of your router connecting to a very cheap switch in a different room, and then connecting multiple devices to that cheap switch, whereas having 2 or 3 direct wires to a room is more ideal. Although inherently, I don't think this one has power over Ethernet, so if you were going to try and have, I don't know, 4 cameras, or even 8 cameras, each with their own connection and power over Ethernet, if that was a thing, this router, and pretty much any home router, is not going to be good enough. Oh, man. So, obviously I have very little to say as far as video games, and, well, for a while. Did a little bit of LEGO DC Supervillains post-game stuff. It's the post-game levels, I can say now, having played a couple of them, are story missions that feel like they were made by a different team, because they feel much closer to what you'd generally expect a LEGO level to feel like, instead of being big round arenas. And you're playing not as the supervillains, but as the superheroes, the Justice League, which that really feels like that should have been content that was free and included with the game originally and integrated. It would have made so much more sense, and this is only a slight spoiler of what didn't happen in LEGO DC Supervillains, which doesn't really matter because nobody played it anyways. But it would have made a lot of sense that the custom character you're playing as would act as a, like, mole, and that she would have been secretly a hero the whole time, and they would have just told you that, and then they would have said, hey, nobody knows who you are. Batman has this plan where you're going to go in and pretend to be a supervillain, and then you're going to you're going to occasionally also do missions with the superheroes when nobody is looking. And so you would do like one level where you play with the Justice League as a hero, and then you do one level where you play as the supervillains. And inherently you could leave it up for the player to decide whether they actually are siding with the heroes or the supervillains. Because it could have been Lex Luthor also gave the exact same plan and said, you're going to be a mole and you're going to spy on the Justice League for the villains. That general concept really needed to happen, though, so that you can fairly quickly would that would let you play with the heroes, which I think most kids would have wanted to play with the heroes at least somewhat. I just don't think the edgelord concept of playing as the villains in the DC universe really works with little kids who are playing Lego games so much. I think what we're going to do here is just use just destroy this just for safety. Just in case that means something. If anything, I'd potentially have exhausted his moves even further. Just do a direct attack for 1200. And then summon Zeus. I guess the only other thing I could really say is that what I was watching over the weekend was Sweet Tooth, which is an interesting comic book to Netflix live action series. And I think a lot of the success in Sweet Tooth, and its 2 seasons so far, has to be attributed to the fact that they did go with practical effects for the hybrid kids that are half human, half animal. Had that been CGI or animated, then I think a lot of the interest would have been drained out of that story. And I think the story itself is pretty decent. So, but I can't 100% attest that Sweet Tooth, the comic book that it's based off, is actually anywhere as good. Inherently, I assume Sweet Tooth kind of suffered in the fact that it's about a global pandemic and was released almost certainly around the time of the COVID-19 global pandemic. So even now, that has mostly receded back to just a minimal level. Although I will admit, I heard somebody like around me was tested positive for COVID just a week ago. But yeah, it probably suffered from that. I think it think Sweet Tooth is a pretty good series. Now remember, I was watching this where at best you'd get 22 minutes before then it would start buffering. And then I watched all but the last episode, which is a funny point to end, certainly, but of Daniel Spellbound, which is a TV Y7 CGI cartoon where it involves a lot of magic and stuff like that. Inherently, between those two, that I'm not watching a lot of mature adult content. I was going to watch Indiana Jones from my Blu-rays, which arguably I'm thinking of just getting rid of a lot of the Blu-rays. But yeah, the TV wouldn't work on any HDMI input, so that was the only reason I was going to watch Blu-rays, is because I thought that the cable, the dish Joey, had broken, but it turned out no, it wasn't the dish Joey, it was the TV itself. So plugging in my PlayStation 3 and trying to get that to work wasn't working either. PlayStation 3 is old. I could definitely smell it burning dust when I turned it on. Yeah, I'm dangerously getting to the point where I'm thinking about just getting rid of my DVDs and Blu-rays and saying, you know what, let's just rebuy them if I ever get around to watching them. Wow. That was certainly something. That was a massive amount of damage he just did. We're just in this weird position, certainly, where you can just kind of sit back and take it easy, because, like, activate one more spell card, fusion, link summon, 3 monsters. I mean, that's literally all I have to do as far as the daily quest. And I wonder if this is because we're getting, like, maybe less daily quests too over the weekend. Because having 3 daily quests really does not make sense. I didn't play over the weekend. I should have a dual link view. I should have 6 to 9 daily quests, and yet I don't. Maybe they were under maintenance for most of the weekend, so they didn't give daily quests because of that. But that's weird that Yu-Gi-Oh! Wouldn't catch up and give you more daily quests to catch up. It's also weird that Yu-Gi-Oh! Compared to Destiny Child, they are very bad at, like, compensating for anything, like for maintenance. Like, Destiny Child gives an apology and free stuff every time it goes down for maintenance, even when it's scheduled maintenance, even when everybody knows it's going to be down for maintenance. They say, hey, we know there are some people out there that in this time slot wanted to play. Maybe those are the people who are obsessive and are non-stop playing the game, or maybe those are just people who got unlucky. It doesn't matter to them that giving away free digital content is not a problem. And what they give away isn't amazingly good, but it feels good enough. It's not irritating. Minimal amount of content or free stuff. Whereas Yu-Gi-Oh! Could easily give a legacy pack or just a Master Duel pack every time it's every time they're down for maintenance, even a little bit. So I guess I'm effectively trying to get him to draw as many cards as possible. We'll just see if that really benefits me or not. Because the only reason you would do this is if you were 100% certain that your strategy can beat whatever strategy your opponent has, and there's just no way in Yu-Gi-Oh! You're going to know that your strategy can 100% beat someone else's strategy. So his first turn here, which will allow him to attack, gives him a massive amount of cards. And if this was a collectible card game where you had a certain amount of mana and you could only play a certain number of cards, that might be a problem. But in Yu-Gi-Oh! There's very little limitations as far as what cards you can play. So he can easily take up 5 spell slots, spell trap slots, a field spot, and then 5 monster spots and 1 of the 2 extra monster spots. And all I can potentially do is see if I can destroy his strategies, which he almost certainly has a way of countering. He's down to 5 and I'm down to 2. I think we'll probably try and make this our last game. Like, I need to activate a spell card and then just link summon a bunch, and if I win, that's great. If I don't, then whatever. The thought definitely does occur to me that watching like Daniel Spellbound, the TVY7 as an adult is almost certainly a huge waste of time. Slightly more justifiable to watch something like an old Goosebumps cartoon that would have been something closer to my age appropriateness when it originally came out, but yeah. There just hasn't been a lot of great adult content that has interested me on Netflix in the past couple weeks, at least. There was this Indian thing called Tooth Paris, where it's a female vampire breaks her tooth and starts a romance with a dentist guy, a nerdy dentist character, which I thought that was pretty good. It is Indian, so they're speaking English. That being said, they are speaking what is very much a East Indian, is what I mean when I say Indian, English dialogue. But yeah, it's not a huge problem. Let's see. But yeah, before Tooth Curry, I don't know if I was watching what the last adult focused thing would have been on Netflix. But I guess I can't be held to that high of a standard when one of their major new things they're promoting is just a special episode of Power Rangers, almost certainly for adults. Guess we'll send this to the graveyard. This whole time he's just been trying to ritual summon this character. So now I'm completely out of character, so it's gonna just be whatever one card I draw. Okay. If this trap can stop this completely, or something in the graveyard can stop this completely. What's funny is we're getting closer. We're shockingly getting closer after giving him all those extra cards and all those extra opportunities. My strategy may just be inherently strong enough to overpower all of that. Although, I wouldn't really count on it when you have 2 unknown cards and 3 face-up effect monsters. Or 4 face-up effect monsters. Okay. I could link summon and summon a 3 here first. So let's do that. Even though that's probably not the best move. Go ahead and activate this effect. And we'll banish that card. Okay, that worked fairly well. So now he's got 2 cards that can't beat this, and 1 card in his hand. So I am in pretty good shape, but not the best shape ever. He still could definitely play this around. So as far as interesting news, I see Techland, the makers of Dying Light 2, are hiring, which at one point GameDeveloper.com was running more of a announcements as far as job listings, and I don't know if my macro is just skipping over those articles or if they've just stopped doing that. But here we can see 4 job listings, which that probably does give you some indication that they are planning on making more Dying Light type games, or making more games in general at Techland, which that was a safe assumption, I'm sure, to make anyways. Daedalic is promoting this YouTube video of Deponia on stage. So it's a live action recreation of at least some of the story around Deponia. That being said, I'm fairly certain, since Deponia by default is in German, and looking at all of this writing, that this all would be in German too. Deponia is such a silly story that it does kind of have an interesting twist to it, that doing a live action version of it kind of makes some sense. Whereas if you were going to do an on-stage live action performance of, say, Mario Odyssey, it probably wouldn't make a lot of sense there. Or even like God of War, the reboot of God of War, something more serious like that. I'm not sure that would make a lot of sense either. That being said, it probably would be helpful if people making plays and such. Oops. Apparently I can't special summon anything more. Yeah, it'd probably be helpful if playwrights did start to think about converting video game stories into plays. I heard that Andrew Lloyd Webber's latest play, Bad Cinderella, flopped pretty badly. And yeah, with the pandemic and just with there being kind of a small number of decent, interesting plays out there, I wouldn't be surprised by that. The Cats to movie translation did not work particularly well at all. Which, that should be super easy, frankly, to have pulled off. All you really needed to do is record multiple presentations on stage of Cats and put it in theaters, or direct to DVD, which I'm sure they already even have that. You don't have to do much more than that, or you do something like the Les Miserables movie that came out probably a decade or two ago, which visually had a lot of polish to it, but probably they wasted a lot of money making it look like a movie, and it's still just going to be a play. So now you just get this crown when you win. Interesting. What's funny is the log book seems to have a little headphones on it, as if you would be recording the audio. So that doesn't make the most amount of sense. So yeah, one more game to Pendulum Fusion summon, and then we're making just continued progress as far as through the battle pass. Yeah. I don't think I even just care enough to even try and do this. Yeah. Do have like a dual live. But yeah. I think I just want to kind of try and take it easy. I've got today and tomorrow, I guess, to potentially try and get to doing some Lego DC supervillains before I'm going to be distracted. So, yeah. I definitely think the wild and wacky comedy of Deponia as a point-and-click adventure in particular works well moving towards a play. You could easily turn Deponia into probably an animated mini-series. I don't think you could make it a movie. It would be too long, and probably long feature films are probably not what you want when you're getting to comedy. Hi-Fi Rush has update 4.0 or now live. You can check out the patch notes if you check out Hi-Fi Rush on Twitter, which we're still doing Twitter. And then Cyan wanted to say that they were overjoyed by the positivity and excitement around Firmament's cinematic trailer. Thanks to everyone. Can you believe it's only 10 days until launch? It would be interesting, I suppose, if it turns out that Firmament is like one of the best PC games of the year, just because so many other bad games came out. Although inherently the Resident Evil 4 remake is going to win that category, we may have some close competition for the number 2, number 3 spots as far as PC or AAA games in general. GameDeveloper.com does have an article here, how Darkest Dungeon 2's developers evolved their early access process, which just might be an interesting read considering how Darkest Dungeon 1 seems to really have gotten all of its success in its early access phase, and by the time it was a final product that no longer was being called early access, I think most of its rabid fandom had played the game for 400 or 500 hours and was done playing the game. Certainly Darkest Dungeon 2 is airing on my channel Darkest Dungeon 1 is airing on my channel right now, and it's only a slight spoiler for the game to say I did not like it. It was long and grindy and didn't have any roguelite elements in it enough to keep pushing me forward. There are roguelite elements in it in that you evolve your city, and that potentially will get you better characters, but inherently there's this limiting factor in which you only have 4 characters in your team, and even at their max level they still have very little chance of defeating the Darkest Dungeon, and it just doesn't feel like there's enough of a single player narrative storyline to make that not be the case. So you really it doesn't feel like it benefits you much if you struggle to defeat another region at its maximum level or defeat a final boss at the maximum area. Inherently the Darkest Dungeon system is to get as many blessings on each character and remove as many curses and give them as much skills and traits as possible that would give them little bonuses, but inherently I think you also just have to become an expert in a game that is far too grindy for what it's actually asking for. So now it seems like they're doing multiple layers of early access. Let's see. We've kind of learned you need an experimental branch of your early access game. So they're doing early access experimental. So early access on early access. And then we have private test groups before we go they even go to the experimental branch. So they have streamers potentially playing on private test groups, or just friends and family of Red Hook Games playing on private test groups, or employees. Then they push to an early access, then to early access, then they go to an early access branch. So it's just ridiculous. And inherently, I think that's why so many people liked Darkest Dungeon 1, is because the game they were playing originally is not the same game that was the final product. I imagine the very first playable version of Darkest Dungeon 1 was relatively easy, and then they just constantly added more characters and added more complications and added more enemies. And as the players were playing in early access, they got better and better to the point where I think the fan base for Darkest Dungeon 2 even is probably people who are experts at Darkest Dungeon 1. And so it's going to very much, I suspect, be one of these games that you should not play the sequel if you did not become an expert on the first game. It's just not going to be new player friendly at all. Inherently, though, I will also say, screenshots I'm seeing here of Darkest Dungeon 2 doesn't seem like there's too much new. Maybe this is a new gameplay mechanic, or maybe this is just an animation. There is considerably very little animation or different gameplay mechanics in Darkest Dungeon. In a lot of ways, I guess Darkest Dungeon might work a lot better as a tabletop game in the real world, too. It is definitely built around a lot of those concepts, and there's definitely a lot of dice rolls happening, fairly obviously. The Mario movie now has cleared 500 million in North America, and yeah, we don't need to talk about the trading card game live. That's just a remnant. So let me clean up some of these tabs, and then we'll get to the Video Games Chronicle articles. Hogwarts Legacy has topped $15 million in sales and grossed over $1 billion, which, yeah, it's nice to get a reaffirmation that Hogwarts Legacy is selling very well. Now, noticeably, I don't think their latest update, adding just an arachnophobia mode, is that being the only thing I recall them even mentioning. I don't think that's adding perhaps as much content as you could. I question if perhaps Hogwarts Legacy should have been a game that was just constantly getting updated much closer to like the not Stardew Valley, but the Disney Stardew Valley clone, or Animal Crossing clone. Like, I could see a Harry Potter game being very much like Animal Crossing, where you're just constantly getting updates and constantly getting like daily chores and tasks. Or I could see it constantly being updated like a live service game where there's just new enemies and dungeons and things to deal with. Seagate cut the price of their storage cards. I think we talked about that in the previous stream. Nintendo is hosting a Treehouse Live stream for Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. When is this happening? May 11th, so in 3 days. Sony is shutting down the Concrete Genie Studio Pixel Opus. The studio was working on a collaboration with Sony Pictures Animation, which I guess that inherently means the collaboration for Sony Pictures Animation is also done. It seems almost ironically backwards here that you have a game like Redfall come out from Arcane Studios Austin, and there seems to be really no punishment at all handed down for it being such a messy failure to anybody, whether it is ZeniMax as the managers and the middlemen, or whether it's Major Nelson as the person in charge of Xbox, or whether it would have been Arcane's own managers. And yet you have a game like Concrete Genie that came out perhaps to very little fanfare, and Sony was able to just stay real quiet about it, and now they're shutting things down. Inherently, I do think Sony is in a worse position. I think financially they probably have enough money where they could have kept the studio alive and working just to make another Sony exclusive, which if I was Sony, that's definitely what I would be doing. Is I would say we're not shutting down any functional companies, and maybe this wasn't a functional company. Instead, we're going to give them projects, and I don't care if they're single A games or small indie games, but we just need more exclusives. We want 2024 to be a year of exclusives, potentially to balance out what could be the acquisition of Activision Blizzard by Microsoft, which would potentially push a lot of people to buying Xboxes instead, or could just be Starfield fandom. Like, there's potentially a lot of hype around Starfield. So I could certainly see that being a thing too. But instead, Sony is shutting down places and seemingly becoming just more insular. Which, at a certain point, it may give off the feeling that Sony is just taking its toys and going home and working towards shutting down the PlayStation division in total. Sony always had this weird thing where their studios, their studios were second-party studios, and that those were the people they were heavily relying on for big sellers and exclusives. I didn't even click on what this new thing does. It's just a new icon on Yu-Gi-Oh! To bring up all of the new things. Alright, let's go ahead and hide this user from the channel on the chat for making unreasonable demands that I speak in a different language to accommodate them. That's just ridiculously unreasonable. It's fairly also unreasonable, certainly, when you have rednecks in the United States say the same thing. This is America, speak English. But whatever language someone is speaking, you have to approach them with that language if you can. Otherwise, you just have to admit that you are going to struggle to communicate or be unable of communicating. But it's a ridiculous demand to assume somebody can speak a different language, or even if they can speak a different language, force them to speak a different language. Which, in a funny way, I guess that's perhaps the pronouns argument too, is that when one person is speaking the way they grew up, using standard him, her, she, he type pronouns, and they don't mean any real insult on that, it's frankly somewhat insulting to demand them to learn new pronouns. And then the same way, if someone is honestly just using they them pronouns in their speaking, trying to correct them and say, nope, you've got to use him, her, or gendered pronouns, is also insulting. I think the insult and the offense and the problem there certainly is just whoever's speaking, and whoever's speaking is probably speaking the way that's most natural to them. And getting in these tiny little fights is pointless. Of course, it also has nothing to do with video games, so let's move on. Video games. Chronicle says Disney Speedstorm Studio says it won't nerf its most powerful character. Mike Wazowski will become less popular over time, says Gameloft. Which, okay. That seems like that's a weird thing to say, but it's not the worst response or the worst decision. Like, at a certain point, I guess, if games are imbalanced, people will stop playing it. Inherently, this Disney Speedstorm game, I haven't paid a lot of attention to it, but this was the racing game that felt a little too real worldy in the vehicles to the point where it just doesn't really feel like it connects with the Disney characters. It feels like you can very easily have this exact same game and remove the Disney components and you would be fine. As a Mario Kart racing style racing game, it looks fine, and I guess they are driving in the Beast's Beauty and the Beast's house as far as the track, which I didn't even realize that until I saw a bunch of teacups. So yeah, it looks fine as a racing game, and it might be on PC. So as long as it doesn't have ridiculous cost up front or ridiculous DLC, otherwise it seems to be fine. I don't know what this character's specific ability is. He seems like he has a shield that maybe stops people from crashing into him, or he maybe just has a dash ability. I think almost all the people would have dash abilities though. Seems like he can do flips and spins, but I imagine all the racers can do that. I guess maybe he drives through these doors and nobody else can drive through the doors. With the ability to both teleport him a great distance forward and teleport opponents a great distance backwards. Yeah, I think the idea of a teleporting function probably hurts racing games quite a bit. Like, if you were randomly racing and all of a sudden somebody just appears in front of you, that's not particularly fair. And keeping everybody on the same play field, and potentially you being in the front lines in first place and then being teleported backwards to second place is not particularly fair. So you could potentially say here the Gameloft is just being lazy and they don't want to program a different ability in there. Inherently, it would be very easy to remove the ability to teleport somebody backwards and instead have them maybe crash into a closed Monsters Inc. door, which would slow them down a little bit if they can't avoid it, or have him simply boost his speed when he drives through a door, which is a little bit different from what the actual doors would do, but you wouldn't have to change the visuals that much. But yeah, teleporting in a racing game's not a good feature to have. That definitely seems unfair. Moving on, the Advanced Wars reboot director says he wants to make a new Kuru Rin or Chibi Robo. WayForward's James Montaigne also says that Rhythm Heaven and WarioWare are dream projects. So he's just making a public appeal here for more remakes of old games. Which, I mean, at a certain point, Nintendo could definitely use more games. So it doesn't kill them, I imagine, to potentially have a third party develop remakes of old games. That being said, there's a point here where almost certainly WayForward wants Nintendo to be the publisher and fund the development of these games, and if Nintendo doesn't want to spend that money, I could see them saying no. I've never even heard of Kururin, so that may not have come to the West as a game. Let's see. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says Microsoft has hired the EU-beating lawyer to help overturn the UK regulator's Activision merger block. The acquisition was blocked last month by an appeal, but an appeal is planned. Who is this lawyer? Would we recognize his name? Daniel Beard KC, and plans to lodge the appeal at the UK's Competition Appeal Tribunal in a matter of days. Well, it seems to me like they should have probably hired him earlier than that. If you were going to have to hire somebody, which this probably indicates that Microsoft thought that they weren't going to get denied, to the point where they were overly confident that they weren't going to be denied. But yeah, it would have made a lot of sense to publicly announce that this guy is working with us and preparing our legal filings already, instead of saying, well, we've got him now, because you may very well have scared them away from denying it in the first place if you'd said, well, we've got this guy who's already shown some level of success as far as beating the EU. I don't know what parts of the EU or what laws of the EU he's known for beating. He represented Apple after the EA demanded the company pay $13 billion in taxes because it claimed Ireland had offered its illegal state, and Apple went on to appeal. Offered it illegal state aid. Okay, that makes more sense. Which that sounds like a weird case that I don't even know anything about. That the European Union was saying that Ireland offered it illegal state aid, which gave Ireland potentially an unfair advantage, and so the EU, doing what it often does, which is desperately trying to balance out very different economic countries, was trying to get a bunch of taxes. He also represented Intel last year in a successful attempt to overturn a decade-old 1.1 billion euro fine after the EU claimed it was unfairly dominating the microchip market, which arguably both of these may have been cases that were true, but it doesn't seem like it really matters. And inherently, the fact that EU has failed in both of those cases, in those appeals, probably does highlight that the EU is very aggressive at attacking companies outside of the EU, in the sense that both Apple and Intel are outside of the EU. Although Intel at this point, I think, is maybe more of an Israeli company than it is in a Western United States company. Let's see. The Five Nights at Freddy's movie trailer appears online. The trailer for the upcoming movie. No, it's been taken down for copyright reasons. Which, whatever. Okay. Linus Takes Tips just put up a video earlier today talking about a few games that you can install even though they've been removed from the store. But half of them are definitely games that have down like offline servers. So I think Age of Empires Online might be one of them. But yeah, so half of them probably have very little value in why you would want to install them in the first place. And inherently for my channel, if a game is not on Steam, then I'm not really giving, or not easily found on Steam, then I'm not really playing a game that could give anybody any consumer advice as far as whether they'd want to buy it and play it nowadays. So it wouldn't make a lot of sense for me to try and play any of these small collection of delisted games that you can still install via a link via Steam. The fact that Linus Tech Tips is talking about Steam at all is an interesting twist, because even though they are totally about PC, they've actually been very silent as far as talking about video games. Like, they're constantly showing how to build these amazing gaming PCs that really would only be used for gaming PCs, or either video editing, or like 3D modeling or something like that. Something very CPU, GPU intensive, and yet they don't really talk about video games. Very often you'll see Linus playing just like the Doom reboot game as a test, or you'll see them playing Counter-Strike Go or something as a test. But they don't ever talk about those games, and I don't think they really play those games of that much. So maybe they've got a new writer at Linus Tech Tips that's going to push them towards more useful video game content to balance out their channel perhaps a little bit more, because it is kind of silly that they're constantly talking about how to build a gaming PC and then not talking about what games could particularly even work on that PC. Moving on, The Last of Us is one of HBO Max's most streamed shows ever. Only Games of Thrones final 2 seasons received more overall viewership. So, I wonder if that means that we'll see HBO and HBO Max streaming focus on a lot more Last of Us type shows, or if HBO will just do what HBO has been doing so far, which is trying to have like cinematic style, really high quality TV shows, but having very few of them, and for every one that hits, there's usually 3 or 4 that miss. At a certain level, I could certainly see an argument to owning something like Netflix and then HBO Max, where HBO Max would become the premium new original content, and Netflix would just be where you stream the old stuff, which at a certain point maybe Netflix wouldn't even be Netflix, maybe it would be HBO Max and Hulu, or maybe something free. Amazon Prime is in a weird position where their original content is kind of interesting, but then their back catalog is pretty awful. Let's see. Mario movie is now cleared 500 million in North America. We already talked about that. And yeah, I still would say if you're a parent of a kid and they haven't seen it in theaters, you really should get them into the theaters. This is going to be a probably once in a lifetime experience for a Mario movie, particularly if they've missed the Sonic movies. And in reality, you're probably taking a kid to the movies once or twice a year. So in their 18 years, if you did it twice a year, you're talking 36 movies that should be very memorable. Most of those should be memorable, fun experiences that they did. Yes, there will definitely be people that take their kids to movies like once or twice a week, every week. But then there are also people that never take their kids to movies. And there definitely have been long periods of time in which there's very little as far as kids-worthy movies to go out and watch. So I'd say definitely take advantage of it now. Despite its bugginess, Video Game Chronicle says Jedi Survivor's UK launch sales were up over 30% compared to Fallen Order, its predecessor. Digital sales accounted for almost double what Fallen Order managed back in 2019, which there really, to my understanding, isn't even a good version of Jedi Survivor. I think you're better off playing on the PlayStation or the Xbox, probably the PlayStation, but I don't think any of them are particularly great polished products, and the PC version is completely unplayable, which makes it an interesting thing, certainly when the completionist, who is very much probably a prime example of, he seems like a nice guy, but he also seems like he's too nice of a guy, and that has made him kind of a corporate shill. So even his review of Jedi Survivor doesn't really mention the bugs or problems with that he may have run into it, and he just says, yeah, it's good enough to play, and that was about it, which isn't much of a substantive review. Although inherently the completionist is alleging that he's talking to a different audience as far as people that want to get all the achievements and do everything, and I just don't know if that audience is really that big, and that really should be on a game by game basis and not the way you think going into every single game, because there's a lot of games where it is not worth it to get all the achievements, and him spending a lot of time playing games to get all the achievements is probably a waste of his talent. Let's see. And then our final Video Games Chronicle article for today says, sources say that a big PlayStation showcase is weeks away. Sony will reportedly showcase its upcoming games ahead of the Summer Game Fest, which maybe that's the reason that they're shutting down that one company now, is because they wanted to get that negative news out of the way so that they could come out with a big surprise in a couple of weeks with a major showcase of games, which that would be a fairly big surprise, certainly, if all of a sudden there were 6 or 7 games coming out in the next 10 months for Sony, exclusive games in particular. It would almost make some sense that once the Microsoft Activision Blizzard deal had been announced, that secretly in the background PlayStation has been desperately trying to get as many exclusives as possible, and now they're going to start actually announcing things like that at this showcase. But yeah, inherently this is also an article that tells you almost nothing, and definitely nothing that is actionable, so you can just you can either get hyped around these claims, or you can just wait, and it's much smarter to wait. Let's see. The quoted sources here, and we don't tend to even check the sources in video game articles, which is a big problem, particularly when you know that Video Games Chronicle is not particularly the best reporter out there, and most of them aren't particularly good reporters, and a lot of them really suck. They are going with, according to people with knowledge of Sony Interactive Entertainment's plans, and then these claims are being corroborated by Jeff Grubb, who in particular I feel like is a pretty terrible known name as far as a reporter, because he's just flippant with the truth, and he doesn't really, he reports on rumors, and he's a rumor monger more than he is an actual journalist. He doesn't potentially try to get a secondary source to collaborate things on spec. I don't think he's doing anything like that, or and when he gets things wrong, he doesn't really care. Like, you could probably make a long list of just how many things he's gotten wrong in the way he's desperately trying to do his Giant Bomb show, which I assume Grub Snacks, which was the show, is still on. But like, just trying to have rumors week to week is kind of crazy. I have managed, and I'm proud to say this, that I managed to stop listening to Giant Bomb and stop listening to Giant Bomb, and that's been several months now, at least a month or two, and I have no desire to go back. The only thing that slightly I find surprising is that none of the original Giant Bomb cast with Nextlander or anything like that really have gotten any press releases or any kind of coverage at all. They really just seems like they've disappeared from being actual journalists and now are just trying to be YouTubers, and they're not even particularly good at that. Which, yeah, that feels a little weird. But whatever. There definitely was a chance there that I would fall back and start listening to Giant Bomb on the Bombcast. I'm kind of running low on podcasts I am listening to, but that's fine. Well, no, it really isn't, because I've gotten into the point where I'm just listening to old radio, shock jock radio from Ron and Fez, and Bennington, his show after, one of the guys' show after that. But so I'm just listening to like the same YouTube videos of this old radio over and over and over again on YouTube, and it's really stupid because I'm not learning anything new or hearing anything that hasn't just been repeated dozens of times at this point. It's the same audio over and over again. I'm turning into one of those old nostalgic people who listens to the same song every single day, or listens to reads the same book over and over again. Moving on to the Gametsu articles, we already had talked about this. Playon going to merge Deep Silver, Prime Matter, and Ravenscourt under a single brand. I think in a lot of ways to protect Deep Silver, considering how Deep Silver has nothing listed upcoming, and their recently released titles are Dead Island 2, which, if anything, has sold surprisingly well and been received surprisingly well. Saints Row Reboot, I assume, is what their other game, which sold terribly. And then Chorus, which I don't think that particularly sold very well, too. I don't even... Yeah. Apparently came out to a 30 out of 40 as far as Famitsu, and I just don't remember Chorus even coming out. It was definitely a forget it style game where it wasn't good enough for anybody to talk about. So Concrete Genie Studios Pixel Opus to shut down on June 2nd. The San Mateo based studio adventure has come to an end. It might very well be that the studio is being shut down for the most part just because it's in California. And in all fairness, if I was a smart boss, I would have shut down all offices in California a decade ago or so. It doesn't make the most amount of sense unless they're to be in California at all. It would have made a lot more sense to be in Vegas and have your offices in Vegas and then have people drive, which isn't that long of a drive, or fly from Vegas to Florida. Not Florida, but California, for any special office meetings between different companies. But once you just got the California people out of living in California, you would make them you would have to pay just a lot less for real estate and a lot less in general. Now, maybe you make the assumption that all the talented programs are living in California and you won't hire any new programmers unless you have an office in California, but I think that was always a lie, too. Inherently, the East Coast and West Coast of the United States give off this impression that there's a lot of talent there, when in reality, all the opportunity is being put in New York City and Los Angeles, and very few other cities are even given the chance to hire people, when undoubtedly there are good programmers in the 48 other states in the United States, and these companies, video game companies, programming companies in general, just don't seem like they try very hard to hire or have offices in the other states. And particularly Sony being run by a Japanese company, it would make a lot of sense that they would just follow tradition and have a bunch of acquisitions of second party companies in California. Let's see. Moving on. A free-to-play HoloLive fighting game, Idle Showdown, is now available for PC. 8 characters are available at launch. As far as HoloLive characters, though, I don't recognize most of these. Is this supposed to be Hatsune Miku? Like, that seems like a weird collection of characters. Am I thinking of Vocaloid instead of HoloLive? I think I am. Yeah, Hatsune Miku would be Vocaloid. So HoloLive are the VTubers, the virtual anime characters that are being puppeted by YouTubers and streamers. I would say, particularly compared to the way these characters, I suspect, look in general, this 2D pixely animation probably does not match very well. And it definitely feels like this is a fandom run, almost parody like game, and definitely is more in the Japanese mentality. Let's have these HoloLive characters that are not particularly known for fighting or fighting each other in a fighting game. That feels very Japanese. Of course, you could have gone the other direction with the Japanese, and you could have had the HoloLive characters in a adult visual novel or a romance dating novel with no adult content in it, and maybe that would make a little bit more sense. But yeah, I suppose this is something to think about. But like most fighting games, it's going to inherently depend on just whether it's average online number of people you can play together or fight against each other, as far as how long something like that would last and stay relevant. This week's Japanese game releases: The Legend of Zelda 2: Tears of the Kingdom, Fuga Melodies of Steel 2, and more. Plenty of... Seems like the only physical one is Zelda, and then everything else seems to be digital. And even on that, that's not a very long list of digital games. Etrian Odyssey Origins Collection Adventures Guide trailer is available here on Gamatsu if you want to check that out. This is a turn-based RPG or a collection of turn-based RPGs, which we could look at. It seems like it's HD remasters of Etrian Odyssey 1, 2, and 3. You can see there's a lot of text going on. Really not a ton of visuals happening. This definitely looks like it is a very old Nintendo DS style dungeon crawler that they're trying to resell. Some of these games were definitely not worth playing when they originally came out, so it's would not be surprising that if they didn't sell again. We are hitting a point of saturation, certainly as far as HD remasters and remakes, to the point where they're starting to release things that shouldn't have ever been re-released or remade. But we haven't gotten so bad that they're taking just like awful games. we'll know we've hit rock bottom when somebody makes a remaster of like Custer's Revenge or some just awful Atari adventure game, and it's a pixely HD remaster that just makes the pixels a little bit bigger and does nothing else. A lot of those simple games like Adventure on Atari 2 or Pong, you can't remake that and reboot that and make it a game that's anywhere close to what it looks like before or what it was originally. They're just too simple of a game. Like even remaking Super Mario Bros. 1, if you tried to do that in a modern way and make it a 3D environment, it wouldn't really work that well. Let's see. Gamatsu says Loop 8 Summer of Gods, A Guide to Life in Ashihara trailer is available if you want to look at that. A game called Ellipse for PC launches May 17th. What is it? Let's look at it on Steam. A Metroidvania with a female protagonist, it says. At a certain point, I'm starting to wonder if I even like Metroidvanias as much as I think I do. Since Metroid Dread really was way too hard for me, and just a lot of the previous Metroidvanias I played on PC felt either a little lackluster or a little difficult. Maybe I just like the idea of getting new abilities and gated regions, and don't like the idea of difficult enemies blocking your paths. I wonder if a Metroidvania exploration game has ever really been made and sold that way, where frankly a puzzle exploration game is basically that same idea. Yeah, a peaceful mode style Metroidvania game would be an interesting thought of a game. I'm sure somebody's made something like that. Moving on, a game called Organ Quarter for PlayStation VR 2 is now available. It's a virtual reality survival horror game. I would like to kind of get a general idea of what that looks like. It's got a 37-second trailer. Inspired by classic survival horror games. So I guess it's trying to be something like a VR version of something like Silent Hill. And inherently, I have to question whether there's a large number of people that would want to play such a gross and gory looking game in VR. That seems like that is going to have a very niche audience, at least. Capcom has trademarked Monster Hunter Puzzles Final Isles. Maybe that's Feline Isles. Felon? Yeah, that's probably feline. The way as a word. Okay. It seems like a weird crossover, and that you're getting a match 3 puzzle game in the Monster Hunter universe, which are not match 3 puzzle games, and then you have Feline Isles, and if this is what the cats look like, that's a more kitty looking version, or like low polygon kid friendly looking versions of the cats in some of the Monster Hunter games. And then a Nintendo Live 2023 Seattle set for September 1st through the 4th. Was this the one that was more of the fan appreciation event? It seems like it, because it says it's going to have gameplay, performances, tournaments, photo ops, and more. Yeah, this was the one, because I remember this photo where you have these kind of adult looking people playing on playing the video game, and then the kid is just here. And I guess you would have to take your pick as to whether you think this is just a really old sister or if this is supposed to be the mother of both of these kids. And then you have like one kid here, but then you also have two old lady adults over here. And it was this weird thing. Here's another kid here, where half the photos seem to really encourage adults to be around and playing video games too. It'll be interesting to see how this goes, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's just a lot of people or internet streamers that go to this and they say, oh yeah, it was a big disappointment. There was just a big ball pit in the middle of the room and that was it. So yeah, be interesting to see how well Nintendo can run an event, considering how Nintendo has been just doing Nintendo Directs for a couple of years now. Alright, we got some flawless cleanup here. Here's an e-game that has no reviews since November 23rd, 2021. And getting duplicates here. Eternal Starlight VR. I think I can remove this. A, because it's a VR game. B, because I don't really like space games, 4X games, real-time strategy games, whatever this would actually be. And C, because it's not really that many reviews since 2021. So I'm going to make a exception there. In almost an exact opposite leaning of strictness, though, I'm going to give this one more time, even though it's likely not going to ever get any more reviews. I have a game called Eternal Edge Plus, which looks like a Square Enix game, but isn't a Square Enix game. The mostly positive at 71% overall slightly concerns me, and the actual game screenshots definitely concern me. It's just not the kind of game I'd really want to play. So for my own personal decision, I think I'm gonna say no to this. At a certain level, this kind of looks like a Zelda game, so if every screenshot looked like this and that it was a 3D take on what the original Zelda game would be, that would have been fine. But that's not most of these screenshots. Most of these screenshots are just showing me the back of the character and then something in the foreground, often very little being in the foreground. So I'm going to say no to that. Eternal Dread 3. Is this an adult game? Apparently not. I feel like this is the game where the characters get captured and then like tied up in bondage in the first two games. Yeah. You can see the character has been captured by a goblin and they're tied up there and you're trying to escape. And it's just like a gameplay mechanic. Here you can see her arms have been tied to a board. It's funny that this game is so very positive. Here you can see the character is tied up here. There. And clearly the characters are in bikini armor. What was the situation with the two previous Eternal Dread games? You have 75% mostly positive with 48 users. Then a year later, 79% with 82 users. And now it's 86% with 152 users. And then there's an Eternal Lore. Eternal Lore here seems to probably not have adapted the concept of being captured, and if anything, it's just slightly worse graphics and probably the exact same game as Eternal Edge Even 3, and that they very possibly are just re-releasing the entire game over and over again. Let's see, Eternal Dread. I guess what you're doing here is you have to put this one on the wish list since it meets the standards. But it does create this weird situation, certainly, where it's basically the same game 3 times over. And it really does feel like this is baby's first bondage as a video game, or this is your teenage awakening, sexual awakening to bondage in a fantasy game. If anything, this game series almost has to be applauded for taking the risk of potentially being accused of corrupting the minds of the youth, and for trying to sneak in a theme that logically kind of makes some sense. If goblins and trolls and gnomes are supposed to be monsters, it would make a lot of sense that they would try and capture people if they kill them or eat them or sell them off as slaves. So in a fantasy world, it makes a lot of sense that those elements would be in more fantasy games. It's actually quite shocking that in Skyrim you don't get arrested and tied up that often. If you do get arrested, it fades out to black and then you're just in the prison at that point. It's not until you have like adult mods in Skyrim that you start to see any kind of adult content. There are in Skyrim no monsters that try to capture you to eat you. They just kill you on sight, and then you get a game over and reload, which would be kind of hard to do in Skyrim. But yeah, nobody tries to tie you up, cannibalize you, eat you. At a certain point, I guess it's not even cannibalism if a troll or goblin, a different species, is eating you in the same way that a human would eat a cow or a pig. But yeah, those are all reasonable and fairly common fantasy elements. Which at a certain point, that is also an issue that is increasingly happening, is that you're having people that are dungeon masters being unwilling to have that kind of content in their fantasy stories, where getting tied up, getting harassed, getting sexually assaulted, like some of that stuff has been just written directly into the new versions of Dungeons and Dragons that say we're not going to let you have your story happen, tell the story you want to have happen, in favor of having kind of a more censored, kid-friendly narratives always when playing Dungeons and Dragons. Of course, you can throw those rules out if your dungeon master allows you, but I've seen a lot of cases where dungeon masters are becoming kind of controlling. And at a certain point, what would have been a fairly reasonable thing to allow, where you would have a character potentially rob or kill a barkeep or something like that, even actions like that are going to either be disallowed or the dungeon master is going to sneakily punish them horribly because of it. And inherently, I guess, if you are playing a Dungeons and Dragons games and you have one person that's a troll playing along, you're going to have to either say, all right, this guy is the troll, and we're going to have to accept him as being the troll, or disinvite him from your game. This SE proxy. Not sure about this one. Top-down shooter in a brutal world. Twin stick shooter. It's probably not really my style of game. So I think I'm going to say no to this. Even though it does meet the requirements. Esoteric VR. Or Tarot VR. It's an interesting idea. It's still in early access though, so I'll give it more time. Plus it's a VR game, so at a certain point. I don't know if you particularly benefit much from having the tarot cards displayed in VR. You might get the classic images here of this animation closer to your face, but if you had an actual set of the tarot cards and put it close to your face, that would be fine too. And I doubt too many people actually play with tarot cards and have like a cup and a pentacle and a sword and a wand, which are the 4 suits of the tarot card set. I doubt you would need physical versions of that for any real reason. It is helpful to potentially have a book that explains what the cards mean, or what they generally are assumed to mean. But having this all in VR instead of this being like a mobile game or something you can play outside of VR would probably be a lot more helpful. I guess I'll leave it on the following list and see if it ever comes out of early access. Escape World Dilemma. It's a free-to-play escape the themed area game. We'll go ahead and, you know what, we'll just add it to the library now. There's just no reason to even not add free-to-play games. And then if I ended up playing Escape World Dilemma, and that's apparently the only game from this developer. If I ended up playing this and covering it and it's a free game, then whatever. Like, that really just doesn't matter that much. Escape Game Timeless Room, on the other hand, I think needs more time before I'd actually consider it. Has a lot more surreal imagery to it. If anything, I guess I should applaud myself a little bit in that I actually started to stream this morning at a fairly decent time. Instead of what I normally have been doing lately, which is being incredibly late. I'll say on my YouTube channel, seems like the number of subscribers are going up and down. I did see a YouTuber get like fully demonetized because YouTube said they had a whole bunch of bots, which, yeah, they were talking on Reddit on different ways that you could potentially screw over your own YouTube channel or somebody else's YouTube channel by buying a bunch of bots for their channel or your channel too. That being said, I have also heard accusations that some of the earliest success stories on YouTube probably did buy bots, and that led to them getting actual fans and support. But yeah, I suppose my YouTube shorts are still doing anything. I wish I could figure out a better title though. Like, the title is somewhat working in that it's getting people to comment on a YouTube short, when I imagine the number of people that comment on YouTube shorts are incredibly low anyways. But the comment that I have gotten by far has just been no, as far as the title of the videos. Check out this PC game, is I believe the exact title, and just a lot of people have said no. They just put a no, and I think they probably mostly think they're being funny, but it does get me a little engagement. There's been a couple other people who've said, well, this game looks just like this other game, so it's just obviously a like Vampire Survivors ripoff or clone, and it's like, well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but dismissing a game inherently because it's like something that a lot of people like is kind of ridiculous. I think we can say no to this Urban X Night Security. I'm going around in circles as I'm talking. But so yeah, I'm desperately looking for more positivity as far as comments, which like a direct call to action. It'd be hard to phrase that. I could put something like comment if you like this game, or thumbs up if you like this game, but that, or comment if this game looks interesting to you. But I just don't think those titles are any better than a direct call to action. Inherently, I imagine 99.9% of people who see my YouTube shorts think that I'm some kind of shill promoting that one specific Steam game. And they don't, until later, if ever, realize that the YouTube shorts are showing a lot of different Steam games from a lot of different people, and I'm not shilling anything, really. I'm just trying to give out information and inform people, which it might make more sense if the title of the game, of the shorts, were something like Video Game Minute or something like that. But then that probably would get less comments and less interactions. And I guess inherently on the internet, trying to get people to comment more positive stuff is the desire of almost everybody on the internet, except for people like Twitter and Facebook that don't care if you say something positive or negative. Moving on, the GameDeveloper.com articles here. We have already talked about Riot paying over 1,500 women as part of the gender discrimination settlement. If anything, this article seems to have come up a little too often. So I don't know if that's just my macro or if that's just a case of them reposting the same song. Same stuff. If anything, this all looks like this is old GameDeveloper.com news. So it may very well be a case that they just have not posted any new articles in my macro. Just opened the last 5 or 6 stories. Because yeah, every single one of these every single one of the stories up to this one was an old story. There is a report that a small layoffs at PlayOn as it retires Deep Silver and other publishers. Inherently, I think that was the whole thing. The whole idea in the merger is to try and hide how many layoffs they probably actually need to do, as far as just the major failure of Saints Row reboot in particular. Now, inherently, though, this doesn't mean the right people are being laid off. So we may very well find a much more generic game developer in charge of making potentially a new Saints Row reboot. And inherently, they kind of need to go back and make a Saints Row 5 or 6 now and just wipe from our minds the existence of the Saints Row reboot. Because now if you're going to reboot it again, which you still probably want the Saints Row concept and the Saints Row's name, you're going to have to start all over again and try again. Inherently, you could just remake Saints Row 1 which is a very difficult, I think, to play and get game on modern PCs or consoles. So remake Saints Row 1 and remaster that and reboot with that and say this is just going to be the exact same story with the exact same characters, Saints Row 1, and then we're going to remake Saints Row 2 and Saints Row 3 and all the DLC, and then we'll reboot after probably a decade, trying again. And inherently, well, we can complain certainly on the weirdness of there being 4 basically young adult kind of woke SJWs being the gang members of Saints Row. The main problems with the Saints Row reboot was just that it was a very lackluster story in general with very poorly made programming and gameplay mechanics and things like that. Like in the complaint about the characters looking like they are a cookie cutter concepts of SJWs really got forgotten when there was so many other things to complain about as far as Saints Row, and even the more left-leaning mainstream video game journalists could not in any way really defend the Saints Row reboot. Storyline wise, I don't think anybody could find that much to complain about the story and the characters, because there was just so many other things to complain about. And then we've already talked about this, but Sony's closing Concrete Genie's Pixel Opus. I assume Concrete Genie actually came out. I think it did. But yeah, it came out in 2019, but I think it's always been a PlayStation exclusive, so exclusivity almost certainly hurt a game like Concrete Genie, which could have come to PC and then been picked up during Steam sales in the past couple of years. And then Counter-Strike Global Offensive has hit 1.8 million concurrent players. I imagine some of that is the new announcements that they've made for Counter-Strike Global Offensive 2. Or it may just be a good metric to show that there are just more people with PCs and more people gaming in general now than ever. And I guess if the population of humanity goes up and up, or the population of people who can afford to and have time to play games goes up and up, these numbers will constantly go up and up. Alright, so now let's look at the new games that have come out over the weekend. Dippy and Chippy. 2-player couch co-op game. Doesn't look particularly good. And it seems to me the Dippy player and the Chippy player are controlled by one controller. So it's an org with 2 heads. And so that's the gimmick. It's hard to really see that in this case, but yeah. It's an orc or something with 2 heads, and you both have to control it, which almost certainly would be just incredibly frustrating. So I would definitely say no to this, even as a gimmick. And yeah, I don't know why I'm getting duplicate tabs now. Forged Sacrifice, Age-Old, Violent Selection, doesn't look like anything. Mavius, Virtual Join Mave, and Journey is K-pop group. This feels like a game that would have adult content in it, but it seems to be more instead focusing on the idea of a K-pop group and being a I don't know what you really are doing as far as a game. It seems like it might be a video editor game, which they haven't made those in decades, where you're perhaps clipping things together. Always, though, it also just feels like it's a very simplistic, almost Polly Pocket inspired management game. I'll give it a YouTube short and see if anybody knows even Maeve as a K-pop group, whether it's particularly popular or not. Mini open worlds. This looks like this is just an asset flip walking simulator. Let's see. Chronicles of Gold Duel. And we'll give it a chance. Millennial Simulator. Is this a joke game that deserves a YouTube short? I'd say no. Trauma Core Violence. Well, that's a name, certainly. It gets people's attention. We'll give that a chance. It might be a case that I'm getting duplicates because of my network connection stuttering. But honestly, I don't feel like that is a good enough explanation for why I might get duplicate tabs. If anything, it feels more like it just should be a I guess the hero's way I'll say no to. Should be a problem with my programming. So here we have an anime girl made game, but it doesn't seem to have any adult content in it. It doesn't also support English, only Korean and Japanese. Apprentice made Maid's Melancholy. And then it's an RPG maker game where you just play as a maid, and then seems like you have kind of a Plants vs. Zombie defense, and then what looks like a completely different side-scrolling bullet hell game play mechanic, and then a third gameplay mechanic. So it definitely feels like it's all over the place, and that only makes me assume that this is a case where they slapped some anime maids into this game at the last second because they knew it wasn't going to sell. You also have some weirdness in that it says Maid's Melancholy here, but then the main screen you have it more in, I assume this is Korean, and I don't know why the video is playing, considering how it never plays any other time. Yeah, unfortunately this really is one of those games that it's fairly obviously not much of anything. Physics lab doesn't look visually polished enough. Survivor of the Journey. I'm gonna give this a chance. Rummy, Absolute Rummy for Windows 11, we'll give that a chance. This might be a case where this developer is slowly going to put out a bunch of games every couple of days. Well, I guess that's not particularly slowly, but they're going to just constantly put out games that are simplistic card games and put Windows 11 on them, which will potentially capture some people's attention. Grow on the go. Looks like an interesting potential flower raising simulator, I guess. The Plants vs. Zombies game, Plants vs. Zombies 2, I think, had that whole mini game when you were growing plants, and that idea in general really could have become its own thing. And that's kind of what this feels like, is if they expanded it into a slightly more complicated experience with it being a standalone thing, so you don't have to really do the Plants vs. Zombie things. I feel like I'm perhaps not as awake as I should be. Blood Strike here is already mixed, which is maybe a shame, because some of these screenshots look like they might have been interesting, although half of them don't look that interesting. Rainbow Rendezvous. You know what? I'm gonna give this a chance. Mystic Blast. I'll give this a chance too. City of Dusk. Doesn't look like anything. Still rampant. Looks like a mobile game. Doesn't really feel like something that's zoomed out enough to justify playing on a PC. Now I have this thought that I should just work on my macro on screen and show it off, but honestly it would be boring, and frankly I should keep that secret as just a business secret. Like, some of the greatest things that I've been able to do on my YouTube channel is been able to automate things and use scripts, and if people just copied and pasted my code, that would give a particular advantage to them that I want to keep for myself. This Graveyard Sprint is way late to the party, since it's nowhere close to October or Halloween in either direction. Interstellar Expedition, but I do have an ambition certainly to fix my code, because I still have yet to do the thing I've said multiple times, as far as tell it to stop excluding games that don't have a release date. And particularly in this case, on this Monday, it feels like I have skipped some games. Noticeably, this looks like this might be something of interest. We've not seen a lot of games in general, and we haven't seen any adult games. That seems a little weird, but it's not super weird either, because it definitely feels like there's at least somebody looking at all the adult games and approving them before they are listed on Steam, which, while there probably isn't somebody looking at all the non-adult games being listed on Steam via Steam Direct, there probably should be somebody there. It would kind of make sense, though, if there was like 10 or 20 people that were looking at all the new games in general, and then all the adult games were given specifically to one person who, if he takes the weekend off, causes the entire process to slow down. I feel like I'm being very generous here, though, on some of these games. And then a lot of these still, regardless of how generous you're going to be with them. See, this is a nice screen that would look great on a cell phone, but it just does not make any sense to have items that big on a computer. That clearly this should be 2 or 3 times as big as far as the number of rows and columns. Petro Pursuit. I'll give a yes to. Although, I don't know why I'm putting any of these games that are just like platforming things on the fall list. Even a nicely animated one like this is still going to be a no in reality. And then, are these the same people releasing the same games? Well, the art style looks different, the developer looks different. It may just be a coincidence that you have 2 platforming games, or 3 platforming games. Although it may also be just a case that somebody has got multiple games like this and then they're listing them on Steam under different developer and publisher names. Pig Blue. Looks like a visual novel. Creepy visual novel of some sort. Merge Tower Defense. If there's a little bit more visual polish on this, I might consider it. I might have considered it. Here we have another non-English Japanese only game, which it's still nice to see these getting put on Steam, because that does give me an indication that more Japanese only games in particular are showing up on Steam. This also is a VTuber. Mommy Simulator. So what does the mommy do? Pushes babies in a pram, chases after babies running away. Let's see, answers questions. If anything, I think this is probably just an asset flip garbage game. I don't see how I could put this, make a YouTube short around it or anything like that. If anything, this feels like this is one of those kid tantrum games concepts more than a mommy simulator. And this is probably very reductionist as to what a mother does. Does this support Japanese? Nope, it's English, Russian, and Chinese. Which, yeah, that's a language combination that does imply it is probably a troll game. Or a low effort game, at least. A crosswords pictocross game. Burning Secrets, a Bara visual novel. Again, this feels like this would have adult content, and yet this is apparently a gay visual novel that's been just censored. And yeah, I question here if maybe we've hit a point where we need to get back to being concerned about censorship getting becoming more of a thing on Steam, and we're going to start to see just an increased number of games that clearly at one point had adult content in it and then got censored down so they could be on the Steam storefront. Here we have Darkest Dungeon 2, which obviously already I'm going to put on a fall list, although in all fairness it would be really crazy for me to play Darkest Dungeon 2. If I was going to play it, I would play it for a very brief amount of time probably and say, alright, this is just like Darkest Dungeon 1, and thus I'm not really interested in going any further with it and put maybe an hour or two in it. There are some things in this trailer that perhaps catch my eye a little bit. You get new enemies and new traits, and then this does seem like this is perhaps a system you can use to maybe replenish your characters because you're in this cart. Although I wouldn't be surprised if the cart is actually the escape sequence, or if it's just a special sequence that happens every now and then. But yeah, overall, it doesn't feel like too much is different. You have a fishmonger who maybe could give you increased resistance or something, increased stats. Now, arguably, there is a way where, like Darkest Dungeon 1 would have been better if you could increase the stats and make a character highly more likely to survive through a run. Or if you could play on an easy mode and guarantee that they can't die ever, that would have been very helpful too for me. Let's see. About mole rats and depression. Duel. That's an interesting title. And here we have our one adult game. Ginny's Dong has got it going on, the Ginny trilogy. So you have a flat 2D lady with giant torpedo boobs, like probably the biggest I've ever even seen in a video game, and she's a dick girl, so she has a bulge in a lot of these screenshots. It seems like there's two different options really for each screenshot, one with the bulge, one without the bulge. So it seems to me like they're saying this is a remaster of 3 original games that I have no knowledge on. And a lot of this, frankly, looks like this is a cell phone game. Yeah, I think it was possibly originally a cell phone game. And that the background imagery and art doesn't really have much to do with what's going on in the game. And this may very well just be a visual novel. $7.99, English only. And inherently it has the anime tag, and they probably need to get rid of the anime tag as a concept because this animation style definitely does not feel like an anime game in any way. And then this is that other game that I think I said no to. Is there any reason why I would want to say change that opinion? Nope. So we have like one game that was an adult game today, which that's the beginnings of some concern, but not quite to the point where I'd really be concerned. And so that's it for the new games that had release dates that came out over the weekend. And we're not really that far into the stream either, so I could easily have played another game on Yu-Gi-Oh! But you know what? Let's just end it early. We've done everything that needs to happen. I wouldn't be surprised if the Wednesday stream has a lot more news and a lot more games to talk about. That's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want a friend to follow me on any social media sites, there's a whole bunch of links down below. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and gift me a game off my wishlist. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.